She hopes lessons are learned.
I wish that all the airlines company could be more better with the safety of the passenger and crew, and then no more accident like this.
What's being released is the early findings of this investigation based on the flight data recorder and interviews. The cockpit recorder was never found, and families say they've been told that further investigations will need to take place, both here in Indonesia and America, to determine exactly what went wrong with this plane. Rebecca Henschke, BBC News, Jakarta.
3 paralysed people have been able to shop online and chat with their families by controlling a tablet using their minds. They use a brain implant which picks up signals of intended movement and sends them over Bluetooth. They can also browse YouTube, write emails and even play the piano. Earlier, I spoke to John Simmerall, one of the researchers who developed this technology, and asked him more about how the research is helping people.
This particular research continues a line of work that the BrainGate Consortium has been performing, which aims to help restore communication, mobility, and independence for people with tetraplegia, paralysis of the upper limbs and the lower limbs, resulting from spinal cord, ALS, or other neurological disorders. In this particular study, the 3 participants in the clinical trial were able to control the tablet through a small sensor placed in the cortex of the brain, and using that system they were able to compose and send emails, chat online, browse through websites, and complete other tasks just by thinking about moving and clicking a mouse even though they were paralyzed.
This is quite extraordinary, John. How long did it take to get to the stage where you saw it being used in the ideal scenario that you'd hoped for, and what technology is being used here?
So this technology has been evolving in our group for at least 10 to 12 years. 13 participants have been involved in our clinical trial, having the brain surgery and the brain implant and working with us. Before that, lots of animal research that gave us the fundamental understanding of how the brain works. Today we call this an intracortical brain-computer interface. It turns out that even with someone with paralysis, the brain still formulates very fine movement plans, even though the muscles can't respond. And so by placing these sensors down onto the surface of the brain, we can get a very accurate estimation of their intended movements. So the technology takes those signals out and feeds them through some machine learning algorithms, some software that interprets those signals in real time. And then by sending those commands, those point-and-click commands out over Bluetooth, we can link their intended but impossible movements to give them control over a commercial tablet like we showed in this study.
With anyone watching this now who has a loved one with paralysis or someone himself suffers from paralysis, what hope can you give them that perhaps this technology might be available to them one day?
Right, so in the long run, the hope for this technology is that for even people with even more severe neurological deficits, including, for example, advanced stage ALS, which might impair or prevent speech, this technology could offer the potential to fluently type, to communicate with their loved ones, to convey critical information to their caregivers. But certainly we are in the very, very early investigational stage still, which means that the technology is only currently available to people enrolled in our clinical trial. However, we are making progress towards mobile version and a wireless version and a simpler version of this that could be managed by a caregiver and a user at home without us. And the idea is that eventually this would truly improve independence for individuals with severe motor disability in their home. But it is a work in progress, absolutely.
And that was John Simmerall, one of the researchers of that remarkable technology, speaking earlier to Babita. Well, you've been watching Newsday on the BBC. Stay with us, because still to come on the programme, plans to relocate a US airbase on the Japanese island of Okinawa face fierce local opposition. We'll be finding out why.
Also on the programme, in their own words, we hear from 4 budding young Asian poets based here in the UK.
President Kennedy was shot down and died almost immediately. The murder of John Kennedy is a disaster for the whole free world. He caught the imagination of the world the first of a new generation of leaders.
Margaret Thatcher is resigning as leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. Before leaving number 10 to see the Queen, she told her cabinet, "It's a funny old world."
Angela Merkel is Germany's first woman chancellor, easily securing the majority she needed.
Attempts to fly a hot air balloon had to be abandoned after a few minutes, but nobody seemed to mind very much. As one local comic put it, it's not hot air we need, it's hard cash.
Cuba has declared 9 days of mourning following the death of Fidel Castro at the age of 90. Castro developed close ties with the Soviet Union in the 1960s. It was an alliance that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war with the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Sharonjit Lail in Singapore.
Yes, great to have you with us. I'm Babita Sharma here in London. The headlines. A new warning on climate change as the United Nations says global greenhouse gas emissions reached a record high in 2017.
And Indonesian investigators prepare to release their first report into last month's Lion Air disaster. Let's take a look now at some of the front pages from around the world. We can start with the Business Standard, which reports on Amazon's rise to become the leader in India's domestic e-commerce market. It says 5 years after setting up shop in India, the US retail giant has actually overtaken homegrown rival Flipkart, clocking in an astonishing $7.5 billion in sales. Now, Duterte Death Squad is the headline on the front page of the Philippine Star. The paper says the president is creating his own armed civilian group to kill suspected rebels in public places. That's really in response to the new People's Army forming a group of urban assassins. Now, the South China Morning Post is reporting on a researcher. This is a story that we've been reporting on as well. This is the researcher who claimed to create genetically modified babies. Now, Chinese science authorities have vowed to get to the bottom of whether the biologist actually bypassed actual regulations to make the children resistant to HIV. Well, that brings you up to date with some of the papers. Babita, what are some stories sparking discussions online?
Knickers, to be precise, Sharonjit. It pays to be different. Here is the proof from Western Australia. I'll explain what I'm talking about. What's thought to be the largest steer in the world, saved from the slaughterhouse for this reason. It was too big. The humongous beast, curiously named as Knickers, stands at 6'4" and weighs 1,400 kilograms. Well, no meat processor would rise to the challenge at a cattle auction to buy Knickers. He'll now live out the rest of his days on a farm south of Perth.
Well, the governor of the Japanese island of Okinawa says he'll hold a referendum next year over a controversial project to move a U.S. airbase. Japan and the U.S., of course, want to relocate the U.S. Marines Futenma Air Station from an urban area to somewhere less populated. But many locals in Okinawa are opposed to the move, as well as the huge U.S. military presence on the island altogether. The referendum is scheduled for February, but won't be binding on the authorities. Well, John Mitchell is a journalist with the Okinawan Times. I asked him what's so significant about this referendum.
So Governor Denny Tamaki, who is Okinawa's first half American, half Japanese governor, he's saying that this referendum is really going to be a chance for Okinawan people to express their will directly to the governments in Japan and also the government of the United States. Time and time again at the ballot box, Okinawans have elected officials who have wanted to reduce the military presence on the island. So they really see this as a chance for the people of Okinawa to express directly their opinion about whether this air station should be relocated from the crowded heart of Ginowan City further north to Henoko.
Right.
As you probably know, the base at Futenma, it's been dubbed the most dangerous military base in the world. It's surrounded by schools, it's surrounded by hospitals, and there have been a number of accidents in recent years, both in and around the base. And just last week, Okinawa Prefecture, they revealed that actually the water around the base have been contaminated by operations from the military with carcinogenic firefighting chemicals.
No, John, we know it's not just anger over the safety. There's been anger for years over the US military presence in Okinawa, just in general. Tell us what has led to all of this anger.
Today, Okinawa is host to 31 American military installations, which are 70% of the total number of military bases in Japan. And so local residents, for many, many years, they've had to put up with crimes committed by American service members, by accidents. And most importantly today, actually, the bases, they are an economic impediment to the development of the island. The bases take up about 14% of the main island, but they only contribute about 5 or 6% to the economy. So what's at stake with this referendum is really the future vision of Okinawa. On one hand, the governments of Japan and America, they want Okinawa to continue to be militarized, but a lot of Okinawan residents, they see Okinawa as a peaceful zone, as a trading area between Japan and Asia. So really what's at stake is this competing vision of what the future of Okinawa is going to entail. Will it continue to be a militarized area, or will it be a place where trade can develop between Asia and Japan?
John Mitchell there from the Okinawa Times. Now, what is life like for young Asians living here in the UK? We spoke to 4 young East and South Asians who also happen to be budding poets to find out more about their lives in their own words.
At first impressions, you could think I've had it easy. Coming from ends portrayed as so multicultural. Nah, my hometown in South was just another concrete jungle. Always had to play it smart, make the right friends and speak the right words, just so I wouldn't fall victim to the childhood fear of my life being stabbed apart.
This is for the third world kids, the ones that waltz into this world with suitcases, the ones with more stamps on their passport than fingers or toes, the ones whose heart will always be in a 3-way tie between places. The ones who learned early to pack all your memories, clothes and goodbyes into 23 kilograms in cabin baggage.
Our votes never made it to the ballot boxes. Instead, they were cast at home, more specifically in the kitchen, because that's where our nannies and ammis, babies found that their electorate paid the most attention. Rotis and rice became the currency of power, while empty thalis meant a landslide victory.
Hoi, como esta? Have you eaten yet? Grandma would notice again that I've starved myself for about a decade, so a plate full of rice will come my way to eat with pinakbet. Cold winters. I crave for a hot bowl of greasy ramen in a boxed claustrophobic room where waiters yell at me, "Irashaimase."
Yes, we've moved out of the kitchens and into the boardrooms, the operating theatres, the publishing houses. So you'd think that some things would have changed. But our hatred for each other because of our hatred of ourselves meant that everything stayed just the same.
But now that I graduated with this degree, I'm back at home with my Pakistani family. And I feel like I can't do for my family what I did for my friends. Because there's so much I want to share about how mentally ill my life became, knowing that speaking aloud relieves burdens and can empower my relatives to do the same. But my culture doesn't do that. It's still like how it was for my dad, growing up in Karachi, and no one ever talking about their feelings.
And you will learn to trust in your own 2 feet that will never settle, but will always take you just where you need to be.
I just badly crave for people who would ask me if I have eaten yet.
Wow, powerful words from 4 young poets here in the UK. That was great, wasn't it, Sharonjit?
It was, yeah, really powerful.
You've been watching Newsday, Babita Sharma here in London.
And I'm Sharonjit Lail in Singapore. Stay with us because coming up we've got more on the China-US trade issues. And of course, this is all about potentially a thaw in tensions. President Trump's economic advisor says a deal to end the trade row with China may, he says, be possible.
And before we go, here's something you don't often see. In the skies above the Russian city of St. Petersburg, you can spot one aircraft giving a helping hand to another. Local media reported that the helicopter was transporting the fighter jet from an airfield to a brand new military park nearby. So while it may look rather strange, it's not just a flight of fancy. Stay with us. Headlines next. We'll see you soon.
Hello there. We've replaced our cold, dry weather now with something a lot more unsettled, wet, windy and much milder conditions, which will be with us, in fact, for the next few days. Now, through today, this next area of low pressure means business. It's going to be quite a deep area of low, bringing gales and heavy rain. In fact, there could be some disruption to travel throughout today, so keep tuned to your BBC local radio for all the local updates there. Now, we're starting the day off, though, on a pretty mild note. We've lost the overnight frost that we've seen for the last week or so. Temperatures starting off around 6 to 8 degrees. Now, we're dragging this milder air from the Azores on a southwesterly wind. Might not feel so mild, though, because of the gales and the rain, but it really will be milder than what we've been used to. Spells of pretty heavy rain through the morning, moving northwards, followed by some showery bursts of rain further south during the afternoon, and then an area of much heavier persistent rain for Scotland, where we could see some pretty high rainfall totals on the hills there. Temperatures, double figures for all, as high as 14 or 15 across the southeast, but it's going to be very windy indeed. 60, 65 miles an hour in exposure across, and then later in the day, closer to 70 miles an hour, perhaps to the northeast of Scotland and the Northern Isles. And it's a brief window of fine weather during Wednesday evening before the next bout of wet and windy weather starts to spread into the south of the country as you head on into the early part of Thursday. Now, there could be a very windy spell of weather across parts of Wales and the western half of England through Thursday morning as this next little area of low pressure moves northeastwards, and with it again a spell of pretty heavy rain, which will clear through, and by Thursday afternoon we should see a little bit of brightness breaking out. Just a few blustery showers, maybe heavy and thundery across southwestern areas. Temperatures down a degree or so on Wednesday's values, closer to 9 to 13 degrees. As we end the week, low pressure still very much in charge. Again, very windy, particularly across northern areas. As you can see, tightly packed isobars there. But it's going to be, I think, a bright day on Friday. Most of the showers, blustery showers, will be across northern and western areas, and these will be increasingly wintry over the hills, as it will be a chillier day across the north, but very blustery again. A risk of gales across Scotland, maybe into the far north of England. Blustery across the south, but not quite as windy as it'll be further north. And you'll notice a little bit cooler, temperatures of 9 to 10 or 11 Celsius. As we head on in towards the weekend, we maintain an unsettled theme, quite blustery, strong southwesterly winds. Again, fairly mild across England and Wales, something a bit cooler, though, for Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Sometimes being in the driving seat is...
It's just gone midnight here on BBC News, and now it's time for Hard Talk.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. President Trump says he doesn't know whether Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And frankly, he doesn't seem to care. Safe to assume then that he also doesn't care about the hundreds of clerics, intellectuals and dissident activists locked up by MBS's security forces. My guest today is Abdullah Al-Auda, a Saudi exile whose father is facing charges that carry a death sentence. Can anyone or anything challenge Saudi authoritarianism? Abdullah Al-Auda, welcome to Hard Talk, and thank you very much for joining me from Chicago.
Thank you so much for hosting me.
Let's start with your reflections on a pretty remarkable and pretty grim 2 months for those people like you who knew Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi writer and journalist. Let me ask you, are you still shocked and surprised by what happened to him?
Yes, I'm absolutely shocked. The atrocity of killing the veteran journalist and Saudi, figure, Jamal Khashoggi, was really saddening and horrible in every way.
You had things in common with him because, in a sense, both of you went into exile in the United States because you felt you could no longer live inside your homeland in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And I know you spoke to him on several occasions. You were both highly political. You both had views about the need for reform inside Saudi Arabia. Do you believe that he was in any way complacent about the degree to which his security was threatened by the Saudi authorities?
He spoke several times about the threats that he received. He was told at one time that he should go back to Saudi Arabia.
But put your mind back to pre-October 2nd. Would you have been willing to walk into Saudi diplomatic building, or would you have been too fearful to do it?
I would hesitate, but if I was and if I had the connections that Jamal had, and all the relationship and all the hopes, I might fall for it. So it's very natural for someone like Jamal and all his relationship and how he was received by once by the Saudi ambassador here in DC, and how he was treated, and how one senior official called him and offered him a job, and he was given hopes at different points. It's very possible that I would fall for it. Yeah, I mean.
Right now, much of the focus is on the degree to which it is ever going to be possible to trace a line of responsibility for this murder directly to the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia today, that is Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Now, the New York Times, with what appear to be some pretty reliable leaks, suggest that the CIA believes that the line of authority goes direct to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. President Trump himself says, hey, we don't know. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't. And maybe we'll never find out. What do you think?
Well, I think, just saying that we may never find out is just a way of trying to avoid the issue, of trying to hold somebody responsible for this heinous crime, is trying to avoid facing the nation and telling them who did it and why and when and where. So it's a way of avoiding the question of who did it and in what capacity the order came from, and so that's one point. And the other point, about the issue is that if we are thinking who did it, we'll see the fingerprints. Who sought death penalty against my father for similar views of that held by Jamal Khashoggi? Who, arrested several feminists because of their peaceful activists, and then threatened them with even death penalty or life sentence in prison? Who, put a foreign minister under house arrest in Saudi Arabia? Who invaded, who actually, launched strikes against Yemen and,
well, Abdullah,
blockaded Qatar.
You're asking lots of pertinent questions. What's your answer?
Well, my answer is whoever did all these things and, was the mastermind behind all these atrocities is actually the person or the individual behind the killing of Jamal Khashoggi.
So who?
We'll let the viewers decide, and we'll let the.
You're not wanting to answer directly, but clearly your answers are directing us all toward Mohammed bin Salman. I get that. You're in a very sensitive position, and that's, I guess, in a way, what I need to discuss with you, because the Saudi foreign minister, in a BBC interview, just a short time ago, said that the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman, and the Crown Prince, MBS of course, are a red line. They represent every Saudi citizen, and every Saudi citizen represents them, and we will not tolerate any discussion of anything that is disparaging towards the monarch or our Crown Prince. Have you, in a way, been intimidated by those words?
Yes, of course. I'll tell you what a red line is. The red line is killing a journalist. Red line is, launching strikes against civilians. A red line is seeking death penalty against a peaceful activist. A red line is giving life sentences for, feminists and human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia. These are the true red line that should start with the people and their human rights and basic, liberties that they should enjoy in Saudi Arabia.
But with your knowledge
These are the real red line. And if anybody crossed the line, they should be held accountable.
I am so mindful of your situation. You're talking to me from the United States. You're currently in Chicago. But every hour of every day, I know that you are thinking about the fate of your father, Salman al-Audi, who is there in a Saudi prison facing charges of terrorism, involvement in extremism, which could lead to the imposition of the death penalty. How do you couch your words about what is happening in Saudi Arabia, given the reality that is yours and your family's?
Well, just saying that somebody is a red line is trying to say whatever this person did or whatever crime he may be accused of is just beyond the question, and we should not hold anybody accountable, but just because we announce him as a red line. If I said somebody is a red line, meaning that whatever he did, he will not be held accountable.
Have you or close members of your family spoken to him recently?
They have. The health condition of his fluctuated because of a lot of mistreatment, and he was deprived from sleep for a lot of time. And he was deprived from even basic medical care. He was handcuffed, chains were put in his feet, he was blindfolded for a lot of times. Interrogations continued for more than 24 hours, which is more than any law or even the international law allows. And then the charges were just bogus, and he was transferred to a sham trial on 37 charges, including mocking the government achievements, not praying enough for the ruler, and receiving a message that incites rebellion against the government, and things of that sort.
People watching and listening around the world will not necessarily be familiar with your father's case. He's extremely well known in Saudi Arabia as a cleric, as an intellectual. He has had brushes with authority before. He spent years in prison in the 1990s because he was deemed to be dangerous, an associate of the Muslim Brotherhood. At one time he was seen to be a man that was admired by Osama bin Laden, and yet in recent years he's been a propagator of reform, a more progressive sort of scholar, but also it seems he voiced some skepticism about Saudi Arabia's international policies, including the effort to isolate Qatar in recent times. So there are various different reasons why your father may be locked up and facing those charges and possibly facing the death penalty. Why do you think the authorities have gone after your father in the last year?
Well, one thing is that he has the popularity that even the state does not have. I'll just to give you one indication. My father, for example, on Twitter has 14 million followers, double than what the king of Saudi Arabia has. So popularity and legitimacy also in the eye of the people is a thing that the state went after him for. And if you ask me what legitimacy means, he came from religious background. He combined two elements: the religious background and the Islamic, teaching, and at the same time, he embraced democratic rhetoric. He, approach progressive views and, promote that. So for the state, for an authoritarian leaders in Saudi Arabia, somebody who has all these elements will pose a threat, meaning to pull the rug under any authoritarian leadership, and will try to present, as he presented in 2011, a petition that was so popular that 18,000 Saudi citizens signed at that time. That petition is just one page, and it called for, it was titled Toward the State of Rights and Institutions. In that petition, he called for civil society institutions, for liberties in Serbia, for protection of the minorities, for empowering women, and he, most importantly, called for election of the Consultative Council, which is like a parliament-like council that is right now just appointed by the king.
But I suppose the key point, though, which you, his son, as well as your father, have been very strong on in recent times, is that you see Saudi Arabia needing to shift to a much more constitutional monarchy sort of system. And you personally have in recent months been very powerful in your criticism of what you see as a trend toward authoritarianism and absolutism on behalf of Mohammed bin Salman. In fact, you say that he shows signs of wanting to be a more absolute monarch than any of his predecessors from the House of Saud. And yet, I'm mindful that MBS is the guy in his early 30s whose mission is to modernize and transform the country.
Well, I'll tell you what. When he called for diversifying the Saudi economy, he was right, but he took it from prominent economists like Isam al-Zamil, Jamil Farisi, and Barjas al-Barjas, who are languished now in prison because of their economic views. And when he called for social reforms and allowing women to drive, he took that from women like Lujain al-Hudlul, Aziz al-Yusuf, and others who also now are put in prison because of their views. And when he promoted and adopted the idea of moderate Islam, he took it from my father's and his friends and put them in jail. So that's how he just using these reforms in a very superficial way, partially, to just PR and do some PR campaigns for the West and to convince them, and to use also to just exploit their ignorance of the local Saudi society and diversity within that society.
Right, I understand your point, and of course it's personal, and of course you're mindful all the time of what fate your father is going through. But there is a point here which some analysts of Saudi Arabia take very seriously, that the only way to deliver transformational change in Saudi Arabia, given the system they have, is for somebody to seize all the levers of power and force through change in a, frankly, authoritarian way. And I'm going to quote to you Professor Bernard Haeckel, who works at Princeton, and he's a professor of Near East Studies. Now, admittedly, he wrote this long before the murder of Khashoggi, but he wrote of the MBS reform program. He said, the fact is, MBS is trying to deal with a harsh truth about Saudi. The kingdom is economically and politically unsustainable. It's headed towards disaster. His message is one of authoritarian nationalism mixed with populism. And in Haeckel's view, that is a way, perhaps the only way, to displace the traditional Islamic hyper-conservatism. Do you not buy that in any way?
No, I don't, because that's what Bashar al-Assad said when he came to power. He said he is modernizing society, he's modernizing Syria, and he said at that time that he is, you know, faced with a lot of challenges, and he had to take all the powers into his hand, and that's what you know, Saddam Hussein did, and that's how he you know, established an alliance with a lot of powerful countries around the world at that time. But it needed them, you know, even a few decades to realize who Saddam Hussein was at that time. When he, you know, committed a lot of atrocities, they you know, tolerated some of his atrocities until it became really obvious, and you know, they were not able to bear or even to understand at that time. So that's how they realized what Saddam Hussein became to be Saddam Hussein. We know him now.
So you really think there's a direct, immediate parallel between Mohammed bin Salman, who, frankly, just a couple of years ago was the darling of the strategic Western powers. You think there's a direct parallel between him and Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad, or maybe even Hafez al-Assad before him?
Of course I do, and that's how I mean, MBS just used the same you know, PR campaigns that were used. He tried to convince the West of his reformist agenda, but at the same time he grabbed old powers. He even cracked down on his relatives and other royals that he deemed rivals to him. He cracked down the hardest on those who really have the real agenda and were able to establish relationship with the people and the West.
So Abdullah, if you feel so strongly about all of that, what was your reaction just a short time ago when Donald Trump came out and said, look, Saudi Arabia, whatever happened to Khashoggi in terms of who ordered the killing and how it worked out, whatever happened, Saudi Arabia is going to remain our US steadfast partner. He said, it's all about America first. I'm not going to destroy the economy of our country by being foolish with Saudi Arabia. He talks about the $100 billion worth of arms deals that are in the pipeline. He talks about all of the potential for American business to tap into the modernization agenda inside Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump is convinced that it's in America's interest to stick with MBS.
I think it's not in the American interest to put all the eggs in one basket, which is one powerful individual. Well, at the same time, this powerful individual is you know, putting all the region's stability into risk, and also it's not in the national interest to you know, just ignore the vast majority of the royal family, even in Saudi Arabia. And it's not in the national interest to just allow somebody to destabilize the Saudi Arabia and the region, and to you know, risk all these good relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia by just you know, establishing a relationship to one individual, instead of building a long-term individual with the Saudi institutions, with the Saudi royal family, with the Saudi people, with the Saudi, you know, system itself.
You talk of risk, but what of the risk on the flip side of that? What of the risk of seeing MBS undermined, seeing power in Saudi Arabia slip away from the ruling family, and in so doing see Iranian interests in the region strengthened, whether it be in Lebanon, whether it be in Yemen, whether it be in the Gulf itself? That seems to be the perspective that Donald Trump and his associates in the White House have, that frankly they need Saudi Arabia as a regional partner, and they see MBS as a powerful representative of the anti-Iranian interest.
Well, there is a consensus within the Saudi institutions and the Saudi royal family and the Saudi people that Iran could pose you know, a threat in the region, and should be held accountable for any crimes that committed, and to be stopped from interfering in Syria or elsewhere. But at the same time, it's not wise, and it's not in the national interest, it's not a strategic interest to build a relationship with one guy who tried to present himself as the one who could solve all these issues. Well, in reality, he is creating more issues and not solving the Iranian issue.
Right.
So
well, yeah, with that in mind then, are you proposing, as you sit in Chicago as a Saudi exile, are you proposing that the United States government should impose much tougher sanctions on Saudi? They've done the targeted sanctions on 17 individuals. Do you want to see them go much further? Do you want to see an end to arms sales to Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think what I want to see is building a long-term relationship with the Saudi people, with the Saudi institutions, and that's much more important and easier than any other measure. It's just building a relationship with the Saudi people, with the Saudi real institutions, with the majority of the Saudi royal family. If people thought, well, you are against the state, it's not true. You are against the royal family, it's not true. You are against the Saudi people. Well, I am one of the Saudi people, and many times represented the Saudi people in different ways. We are just against one individual who has all the who